Hello, art students. Welcome to today's lecture with me, Professor William Wright, going over Chapter 12 of Mark Getlein's Living with Art. Sorry if I sound stuffy or sneezy today. The hayfield behind our house is getting cut, and yeah, it's just an allergy crazy. Anyway, guess that's why they call it hay fever. Anyway, yeah, let me go ahead and get started. So, Chapter 12. Here it goes. Yeah. Chapter 12 covers the art of the object in daily life. But I also kind of like to break it down as basically a chapter on craft. And it just kind of goes hand in hand that mostly craft materials that we use. The whole point of craft is that they're useful things, and useful things become part of our everyday life. So I like to put them together. And I like this really funny Professor Snape bit I got going here. So anyway, yeah, chapter 12. The craft, the art of everyday life. So let's talk about what separates craft or folk art from art, right? Capital A art. Of course, it belongs in capital A art, but it's its own specific thing. What makes it different than like sculpture or other things? So, folk art or crafts are arts made by regular people for regular people and often for regular purposes. This is not high-minded. It is often ingenious, but it's more to fulfill some sort of ingenious function than necessarily, dig into, tap into your heart or your feelings or communicate some big or broader thing. Now, sometimes it does do that, but it also has this underlying thing of like being for some sort of everyday place or made by some everyday person. So they simply exist among everyday folks. They're usually functional, and the real big thing is that a lot of times it's inexpensive, right? Because they're things we're going to use, and people might need it for some purpose, and they like the kind of higher artistic version of it, but they can't pay for like art. So it's this like in between art that's like art that you get to have in your everyday life, but it doesn't have to be really expensive. And that's oversimplifying, but just so you know too, the term folk means regular people. That's really all. That's why folk music is for regular people. They're not music protege or aficionados. They are just regular people making music. That's folk music. And then folk craft is regular people making craft. So sometimes called lesser arts, which of course I'm not going to say that I like because I'm a potter. That's another thing you should know going into this. I am a potter, and I work in clay. And so I don't particularly love the idea lesser arts. Applied or arts or decorative arts are kind of more understandable. They're things that, again, you apply to some purpose or use in your life. And a lot of times, I mean, most art is decorative to a certain extent, but it is, again, sort of an inexpensive way to fill a wall or a space on your shelf. And the term craft became widely used in the 1800s. The arts and crafts movement happened in the 1800s, kind of all the way through, but mainly in the late 1800s. And essentially, what craft means is that it's skill based. So, really, craft means a skill. So, it's skill based art, right? So, it's an art that you learn. It's not just art that's, you're inspired and you do it, or you go to art school or anything like that. It's literally like anybody can walk in and do this and practice, 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 and you build up a skill. It's actually requires some sort of physical ability to do. And so it takes years of practice and building up how to do it. And this skill basis is what makes it craft, right? You're learning to craft. And at the end of the day, craft often, because it's something for you can do from kids to grown-ups. Anybody can just walk in and do this. It's basically the everyday taking part in making art that we see every day. So yeah, it's the art of the everyday. So in any case, that's kind of the whole spiel on craft, so you know what's different about it. But let's talk about the material. So obviously, I'm going to start with clay because that's what I do. I'm a potter, and I have an art degree, a master's in art in clay, and I've made lots of pots and for artistic purposes as well as functional purposes. But at the end of the day, when we talk about clay as a craft material, in the context of this, I'm typically going to be talking about usable, functional, everyday pottery. I mean, and you can have functional pottery that's not necessarily something you would drink out of, but maybe it holds flowers or something like that. But at the end of the day, typically the clay that I'm talking about as craft has some sort of function in everyday life. And you should also know that clay in this case, because it's going to hold water or hold things, it's always going to be ceramic clay. And typically, for the purpose of this discussion too, is going to be clay that is fired so that it is usable. Okay. Now, when making pots, of course, there is always the idea of hand building, which is, you can roll coils and stack them up, or you can make sheets and fold it up, or you can just model and build up pinch clay. That's hand building, or really, of course, what most of us know is like the main thing you do with clay is called throwing. This is where you put it on a pottery wheel and spin the clay in a way that then allows you to shape and form it very quickly. And you can make small stuff, you can make big stuff. They make all different kinds of wheels. They make electric wheels, that have a motor and you just use a pedal, it speeds up. They have these wheels like the one in the middle, the potter crouches at, and actually you can't see it, but there is a set of holes that kind of go around this wheel, and the potter just puts this stick into those holes. As if it's getting slow, he sticks it in the holes, gets it spinning real fast, and then the momentum of the wheel gets it going long enough for him to shape and form something, and then as it slows down again, he gets the stick back out and gets it going. Or there's, of course, the classic just kick wheel, where there's a wheel either flat or a wheel with like vertical pegs that can stick up, and you literally kick it with your foot, and that keeps the momentum going so you can shape it. And so those two on the left don't require any kind of electricity or motor. It's all manual. And of course, there's all different versions of these. These are just the three kind of most basic versions. But yeah, when you make something on the wheel, it's called throwing. Okay, so throwing clay I guess it used to mean spinning. That's throwing and spinning are basically the same word in Old English. But yeah, that is like kind of the typical use. Yeah, hand build, you throw pots or things that are used in everyday life. And those things can be highly decorative, like this piece here on the right by, oh man, what's his name? I'll have to remember it. I did an art piece on him, or a paper on him way back in the day, but he did these sort of delicately crafted porcelain pieces that are really, they're more decorative than they are. Um, it's Cliff Lee. Sorry, I knew it was a Lee. So Cliff Lee made these pieces on the bottom right that are very delicately crafted, and they're expensive. This guy's in the Smithsonian, and they have function. They're at least modeled after things that have function, but at the end of the day, they're really about the highly decorated craft of this piece. Versus there on the top left, these are pieces by a potter named Warren McKenzie, who we'll talk about more later. But Warren McKenzie was all about making pots for everyday people and making them cheap, making them quickly, and making them simply, but then also injecting them with like some everyday soul, some humble artistry, right? But yeah, that's what we normally see when we're talking about clay craft. I do just because I can. I'll say, here's a couple pieces that I have done in the past. These are several years old, so I'm making even newer and better stuff now. But yeah, at the end of the day, this is my area of expertise, and you shape it, you mold it, and typically when working in clay as a craft, you're using functional, you're creating functional things. Okay, but of course, clay is not all there is to it. There's also glass. Glass actually technically is a form of ceramics because you're heating up earth materials and shaping it. And technically, everything that you put like glaze on pottery that finishes it, it is a form of glass, heated up silica. And in any case, glass, when it has less of the clay and it's more just silica, is clear, smooth glass as we know it. And there's all sorts of different ways to form it. Of course, the main one being blown glass. If you're going to handcraft glass, a lot of times it is blown, which means they basically heat it up so it's liquid, molten, and then they grab a pipe and dip it into that molten glass, and they pick it up in that ball of glass that sticks to the end of that pipe. They blow air through that pipe, and it like a balloon, it grows because it's what they call pyroplastic, which means it's malleable when it's heated. So yeah, this is a very exciting process. I've been in glass blowing studios, and it's always super hot. It can be dangerous. You have to make sure you don't accidentally breathe in. You have to be ready to breathe out, separate from the pipe, and then blow into it. And yeah, there's a lot of spinning. They have like special tongs that can pinch and form and shape things, and then of course like special like knives and cutting tools where they spin the pipe and then they just push against that glass and it cuts properly. Or the other thing they can do is like stretch and layer glass. onto other pieces of glass. That's another thing, is it doesn't always have to be hollow and have glass or air blown into it. It can also be something that is done. You can actually also buy sheets of glass and just like slump it, like heat it up so it falls into like a high temperature mold and takes the shape of that mold and can be really impressive. But in any case, yeah, glass is often you melt it, you blow on it, you shape it. You can also, I guess, make mosaics out of glass, although that's not really what we're talking about here. That's pure like painting with glass. But this is actually, yeah, again, you're using glass blowing and glass molding and shaping to create typically somewhat functional wares. You can create dishes, uh, you can like dry dishes, serving dishes, plates, or things that you can put liquids into. I like these pieces on the left, these cups that are sort of showing that it's made of a malleable, melty material. Kind of takes advantage of it. Of course, then there's like factory made, really tight, clean glass craft. But that's glass. And then, of course, you can't talk about craft without talking about metal, blacksmithing. That's what most people who have the last name Blacksmith or last name Smith were some sort of smith. They were a person who made metal things, and actually also the last name Wright means craftsman. That's so Wrights and Smiths are actually, they probably got their name through being some sort of crafts person. Fun fact. But yeah, smiths typically are going to be people who worked metal, and there's all different kinds of ways of shaping metal. So of course, number one is forged, of course, where you just heat it up to where again it's pyroplastic. It's not molten. It's not liquid. When forging, you just heat it up enough that if you hammer it and push on it and poke it, it will change shape. You can fold it on itself to make extra layers. It is heat work, and you then you cool it and you do all this like tempering stuff that makes it even harder. But yeah, you pound it, you shape it. That's your typical blacksmithing. But then, of course, there are more everyday versions of metalwork, like cutting, with special metal cutting blades or plasma torches, and then of course welding, which is actually just uh, it's actually usually superheating another metal that will then turn molten and kind of melt little bits of the two metal pieces you're trying to join. It's almost like a glue. You're going to melt it and it gets all that stuff super hot and they kind of move together and become one solid piece of metal. And then yeah, you clean it up. It's working with really small amounts of molten metal to join things together. And cutting and welding kind of typically go together. And then of course there's also hammering or sawing in general. Like so, it's cold work. And a lot of times hammering things cold, if it's not a real soft metal, it sometimes makes it like harder. Like cold rolling versus hot rolling produces harder objects. But yeah, jewelry, what do they call that? Like I guess it's metal smithing in general, just so, or jewel smithing. I don't know. But yeah, basically just working and creating jewelry out of metal, or in hammering, it's just not heated. But then, of course, there's also heating it up so hot that the metal becomes liquid and then it can be cast or poured, which we talked about before. And of course, as I said, you get jewelry out of this. You get vessels. You can have serving ware or storage ware, or, we have all kinds of metal vessels, decorative metal vessels. And of course, not to go without mention is tools. The irony of most of the tools you're seeing in this, they are all made of metal. So making tools out of metal, that's a very everyday craft. Like tool shaping, tool forming is a craft in and of itself. And of course, weapons, moving towards metal. Most of human history is broken down into the way the tools were used. And we start with stone tools, and then we get to bronze, and then iron, and then, like the modern era. And so you work through, now we have steel. But yeah, the weapons and tools that are used throughout history are, dictated by the metalworking that's available. Then, of course, another craft we have to talk about is wood. You can carve wood, you can assemble wood, so it's additive or subtractive in its nature because it's soft. It is obviously naturally occurring. Fun quiz. What kind of sculpture is this called where this guy's carving? I'll give you a second to think about it. That's some relief sculpting, if you didn't realize that, so it's flat, it's connected to something, but it also does project in a 3D space. So that is relief carving into wood. And then, of course, here on the right, you see someone who's cut, lumbered, milled wood, and created boxes of some sort and assembled them. And you can do this with furniture and all sorts of stuff. Fun fact, if you are a fan of Parks and Rec from back in the day, Nick Offerman got his start in TV because he was building sets 4 TV shows, and actually, yeah, he's well known for his wood shop now. And those canoes that are in the TV show are actually canoes that he built, which is super cool. But yeah, you can craft furniture, you can craft boats. Obviously, boatmanship is like a huge part of human history in relation to woodcraft. There's also the lathe, which is not unlike throwing pottery. It's just a spinning piece of wood that's spinning so fast that you can carve it on this really fast at this really fast pace, and it becomes it's like it's always symmetrical. It's a spinning carving aspect. So you're doing something that it's going to be the same all the way around, but still you can carve away. This is good for table legs and shaping wood. Again, you can make bowls and dishes out of it. Furniture, you can carve, you can do all these together. That's one thing that's really fun about wood, is that you can do all the different parts at different stages, and because it's not like superheated necessarily, you can do all this cool stuff. Some really cool thing lately that I've heard about and seen about is like putting an electric current through wood to do all this wood burning. I do not recommend it because tons of people are dying from doing it wrong. Only leave that to the professionals. But you do have to be careful, obviously, because woodwork can catch fire and burn and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a really good, versatile material for weaponry. Again, the handles that go onto tools and things, and they have types of wood that are really strong, can cut other wood, and you can make tools out of that. But yeah, typical everyday objects, just like we've talked about before. Another craft is, of course, fibers. The 2 kinds of fibers are, of course, animal fibers like silk, that comes from a worm, and then wool from sheep, and hair that comes from other animals, versus vegetable fibers that are like grasses, rushes, wicker. Wicker is a type of naturally growing fiber that is then usually they soak it and then they can shape it. And you can make baskets. You can make weaponry. Back in the day, part of the reason the Spartans were so successful in beating the Persians at war is that the Persians used wicker shields while the Persians used bronze. But before that, wicker shields were pretty cool and strong until they figured out how to make metal shields. But in any case, again, it's an everyday craftable material. And then, of course, yeah, if you're going to talk about fibers, you got to mention that all of us, we don't walk around uncovered. We have clothing put on us, and that is a form of craft. It's the everyday use of fibers to make clothing, which of course that gets into fashion and wearable objects, and pretty cool, as well as blankets and things that we protect ourselves with. In terms of the elements. And back in the day, it would have been your whole house. If you're talking about tent type structures and huts and things like that, they're often fiber structures. Skeleton and shell systems. We'll learn about that in the architecture chapter. But at the end of the day, yeah, fibers are another everyday craft. Like I said, baskets. They have furniture that you can make. The parts that suspend you are wicker. Beds, of course, are made of wicker at times. Cots and things like that. Rugs. All sorts of fibers are around you every day. So going from those kind of basic craft materials, we have to talk about rare materials like jade, lacquer, ivory, or gold. Jade is a stone, and really from this you can talk about the fact that a lot of craft materials, like the original tools, were made of stone, and real special tools were made of special stones, and that's kind of what we use in stonecraft today. We typically choose to carve them into, we carve nicer tools that are for kind of fancier purposes, carve nicer stones, because stone is not a tool anymore. But in any case, jade, one of the number one things we should talk about as a craft. You can shape and form jade. Of course, there's also like alabaster, gems, all those things. But at the end of the day, jade is one of the more impressive crafts that people can learn. It's this green or yellow stone. Sometimes it has marbling it's for a stone. It's very soft. It can be used to make jewelry. It can actually be used to make decorative weapons. I wouldn't fight with them, but some beautiful kind of ceremonial weapons are made of jade. The typical sources, especially for green jade, are in Asia. Although Mesoamerica, if you go back to the Olmec societies, have beautiful dark green jade spread all across Central America and Mexico. And then there's also, they found there are jade deposits in Italy as well, up on mountaintops. But in any case, lacquerware. Lacquer is actually a type of wax derived from the lac and wax trees in Asia. And it's essentially just literally like a tree sap that you can mix with pigments, and you can use it as a as a coating, usually over wood. Basically you make like a really simple wood like skeleton, and then you put thick layers of lacquer over it, and then you can carve it, and it creates these beautiful like carved surfaces. And it's a really sought after, like difficult material to work with. So especially in Asia, again, it's a really nice like crafts material. And then technically you can actually get dishes that are made almost totally out of lacquer. And these are very small ear dishes made of lacquer, that back in the day during Roman times, lacquer was so rare and difficult to work with that it was one bowl of lacquer was considered 10 times the value of one made of gold, one of these small ear dishes. But yeah, the lac tree, its sap is used to make it. Actually, fun fact too, it's the same, it has urish oil in it, which if you know what that is, then it's the oil in poison ivy that makes you break out. So actually, one thing that makes this kind of interesting and cool too is that people who work with it have to figure out if they have the allergy to poison ivy or urish oil before they can work with it a lot. Pretty amazing. In any case, now shellac is a modern adaptation of lac. They figured out basically that you can squeeze bugs, you can squeeze these specific types of beetles that will secrete a little shiny substance that we call shellac. And typically, shellac is not something you shape into a form, but you can use it to finish crafts. So you can use it on woodcraft, you can finish. I guess you can finish paintings. You can finish lots of stuff with shellac. A lot of furniture is typically finished in it, but it gives like a shiny look. And then there's of course one very famous thing that shellac was used for. That I'm going to ask. Do you guys know what shellac was used for? It's going to blow your mind. This was an everyday thing. Candy. What are these called? Jelly beans, and in forms of like Skittles type things. Anything with that sugary coating around. It was actually bug butt juice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, used to create this like shiny finish, but it's healthy, it's edible, it didn't hurt anybody. And um yeah, just a fun fact about the old ways of making I guess the craft of candy using shellac as a material. Pretty fun. And then of course now we have, modern lacquer is just basically a word we use for anything that's shiny. It's not technically always lac. Obviously, you can still get lac tree sap, or you can get real shellac. But for the most part, candy is not made with bug bud juice. It is made with the sugar that they've figured out how to turn into a lacquer. But you can buy all kinds of things that are not truly lacquer, but they'll create what we call like a lacquer finish, which is just something shiny. But anyway, that's a material I wanted to be sure and cover. And then, of course, gold. Great craft. Fun fact about gold: it will never rust. It can get dirty, but if you clean it, it's shiny, brand new. Sorry, my dogs keep pestering me. But yeah, it's a shiny. As soon as people laid their eyes on gold, they were like, I want some of that. It's shiny, it's rare, it can be shaped and formed, purified to be just really beautiful gold work. That again, it's obviously sought after because it will never rust. And of course, gold, for whatever reason, has become the cultural craft, right? That we just see as the most, I guess, as a craft, it is the highest value material. Just, it always means fanciness because because it's shiny, because it's rare, because it never rusts. I know diamonds are more expensive than gold, but they're not as much a craft as just a type of stone that we can shape and place into gold, which has been crafted. Of course, you don't want to forget other precious metals like silver, platinum, things like that. But yeah, gold has become a cultural phenomenon as well as a craft material. Then there's ivory, which is something we don't see as much anymore. You still see it some, but it's derived from tusks of mostly endangered animals now, and they're mostly endangered because of the harvesting of ivory from them. But yeah, elephant tusks, rhino tusks, I think walrus tusks. Ivory is almost like a stone. It's like between stone and bone, and just is this beautiful. You can carve into it. You can get tons of detail, as you can see, just nuts level of detail in there. Get lots of, I mean, really older kind of North American, like Inuit cultures used a lot of like walrus tusks for their cultural art. And again, you can make everyday dishes or everyday things out of it. These rare materials are usually, even if they are for a functional purpose, it's typically some sort of ceremonial or cultural purpose. Though you can make dishes out of it, they're going to be really high purpose. They're ritualistic dishes more so than everyday, but they're still sort of everyday craft. just with these rarer materials. Also, we see less of this trade now because in Africa they've really cracked down on confiscating and making illegal the illegal poaching and trade of ivory animals, animals and their ivory. But yeah, so we see less of it. It's still around, but it's got to be done right and properly and ethically. But yeah, it is a craft material in and of its own. Then we should talk real quick about modern design. Obviously, modern craft has been revolutionized by computers, and there's this sort of like in between where a person learns to, using the computer, you make a design, and then you make some sort of mold by hand. So the design can be computerized, the making of it can be manual, and it allows this sort of in between, like modern version of craft that is typically real clean. It can be real repetitive and precise while still being, in essence, a hand created, handcrafted object. And obviously, Peter Pincus is the guy who made these, and he makes these really intricate designs. I'm not even really sure that these aren't computerized. These are still handmade, but they're very precise. He makes molds, 22-piece molds and things like that, where he puts them together and they become these really. He paints the color on the inside of the mold very carefully, very precisely, and then he pours clay into the molds, and they come out with these nice, like sectioned off, very very line-oriented, very formal, elements and principles based craft design. And again, it's all about cleanliness and precision. Not always in modern design, but that's one version of modern design. Modern technology has allowed us to be very clean. I like this piece here. It's getting into like CNC router type 3D formation of craft materials. And this one, it's almost cool that the wood has been cut and carved to be literally like the absence of the old versions of this kind of like wooden furniture, right? It's like a shadow of it, yet it still functions as a coffee table. There is this idea of like making art that references back to old art that's happening in modern craft, as in addition to the cleanliness. And then of course, yeah, 3D printing, 3D forming, where again, you might hand draw or hand form something on the computer, or you hand form something and scan it so it can go into the computer, and then the computer can recreate it through 3D printing processes, and you can see. I don't know. It's pretty cool. You can be averse to it because it removes some of the handmade version of it, but it's still a person dictating how the computer's going to use it to make this thing. It's not a big factory produced thing, but in any case, they you can still make furniture out of 3D printed craft. It's kind of like, yeah, just taking modern technology and using it as another way of making everyday objects. This stool and side table here are pretty cool. You just sit on this and put your drink on that while you watch TV. Not that this chair would be very comfortable. Maybe for an interview, maybe not so much TV. But in any case, yeah, 3D printing, 3D production, just computer production, computer design of craft is obviously one of the modern directions that kind of plays with flouting the handmade aspect of it while also lifting other aspects, other ingenious ways of using computers to make handcrafted things. Okay, so in closing, I said I would bring him back a little later. I typically in class for this day, I zoom through those slides really fast so that we can watch this 20-minute first half of a documentary about Warren McKenzie, who's kind of the father of studio pottery in America. Not really. I don't want to just give him credit, but he's one of the main figures that made potters able to do what we do now after the 20th century. He only passed away a few years ago. This piece was made in the last couple of years of his life. Potters make excellent documentaries, so I highly recommend watching it. If you're interested in clay at all, if you have 20 minutes to sit, it's super peaceful. There's no pressure around it. I want you guys to just enjoy watching it. It's one of my favorite days in class because we just get to watch Warren talk about making pots and talk about the use of artists making things they're without ego. They're not signed. He talks at one point about artists working just like your mechanic would work, right? They're making this art is just another part of their job to them, and there's a beauty to the humility of that. But in any case, I find it really interesting. If you have time to watch this video about Warren McKenzie and his creation, they call it Mingei soda because the folk craft of handmade pottery in Asia really super inspired him. Inspired him, and yeah, so the folk craft was called Mingei, and he's from Minnesota, so he came and combined that folk craft of Asia with Minnesota style like handmade craft, and so they call it Mingei soda, and it's sort of he's like the guy who came up with that. But in any case, watch the video if you have time. It's really enjoyable. I hope you enjoyed chapter 12, and I will see you soon. Thanks.